really you have a handful of decision makers that would tell the story, the narrative, and they're all part of a little club. But we broke that cartel with citizen journalism. You might say, well, what's the level of professionalism for the, well, they know how to hold a camera. And the reason that's important is because people can see for themselves. What Rebel News did, we said to people, you're not crazy. You're not alone. Don't go along with everyone. We were that other person in the room that let conformity fall from 35% or whatever down to 5%.
Welcome to the Thought Leader Revolution with Nikki Ballou. Join the revolution. There's never been a better time in history to speak your truth, find your freedom, and make your fortune. Each week, we interview the world's top thought leaders and learn the secrets of how they built a 6 to 7 figure practice. This episode has been brought to you by eCircleacademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou. And boy, do we have an incredible guest lined up for you today. Today's guest is one of the heroes of Canada's independent media landscape. He's someone who's always been willing to speak truth to power, and he's a true thought leader when it comes to creating a powerful brand of standing up for freedom and standing up for all things that make Canada a great country. I am speaking, of course, of none other than the one, the only, the legendary Ezra Levant of Rebel News. Welcome to the show, Ezra.
Wow, Nikki, what a friendly introduction. Thank you very much for that.
My pleasure, my friend. Thanks for being here. It's really, truly an honor to have you here. Ezra, the folks who listen to this show tend to be freedom lovers. They tend to be entrepreneurs. They tend to be men and women who are interested in growing. They're seekers. They want to be better. They want to make a bigger difference. They listen to this show not because of me, because I'm here every week. They listen because of you. They want to get to know you a bit. They want to learn from you. And before they can truly open themselves up to you, they really get to know you and your backstory. So tell us your backstory. How'd you get to be the great Ezra Levant?
Well, I was born in Calgary. I lived west of the city, so I was a little bit country, which I think helped shape my politics. I think it made me a little more conservative than had I grown up in the city. I went to undergrad business school and then to law school, but I was always more interested in politics and journalism. I wrote for the school papers even in high school and university. And then even when I was a student, I managed to get a bit of a syndicate going. I was writing for 3 or 4 newspapers around the country, even though I was still in school. And when I graduated, I did article as a law student and eventually become a lawyer. But I actually sort of ran away and joined the circus. I got involved with a political party out there. It's no longer around, but it used to be called the Reform Party of Canada, which was conservative-leaning, populist, led by Preston Manning. And right out of law school, I went to Ottawa to work in Parliament for the leader of that party, Preston Manning. I did question period stuff and some speeches, and it really started me down the road of politics and journalism. And here I am some 30-odd years later, and I'm still doing politics and journalism.
Wow. So I remember the Reform Party, and I remember Preston Manning very well. In fact, his father had been a longtime premier of Alberta, wasn't he? Ernest Manning, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they had that prairie populist tradition, which appealed to me. And even the name Reform Party, the fact that it was a positive attempt to change things. Now, in the end, the Reform Party did not succeed. In fact, critics would say it split the vote and let the Liberal Party win back-to-back majorities. But eventually, we reunited. Stephen Harper merged it with the old PC party, and he went on to win a few elections. But I've kept my populist side, and I was involved with different media companies. I published a magazine called The Western Standard. I was involved with something called the Sun News Network, which for a couple of years was a cable TV show out of Toronto that was supported by Pierre-Carl Pelado, the entrepreneur from Quebec. And for the last 9 years, time sure flies, I've run something called Rebel News, which is fairly political. I mean, our politics are pretty clear. We're freedom-oriented. We're journalistic, and we really were one of the first citizen journalist outlets in Canada. What I mean by that is our reporters didn't go to journalism school. In fact, only one of our staff did. But I think that you can be a journalist even if you're not a university grad, if you just have a sense of curiosity about you, if you're a skeptic, if you're willing to be contrarian sometimes. In fact, I think those are the best journalists. So we're 9 years old. We have about 40 staff. We've had about 2 billion views and impressions. It's a lot of people who've seen our stuff. And we have certain beats. We were well known for being skeptics and non-conformists during the lockdowns. We were contrarians. And we're freedom-oriented, so we're against big government. We sometimes like to travel. Every year I go to the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland. We're not invited there. In fact, we're they don't like us much there, but we scrum politicians on the street, and we like to try and hold them accountable. So we have journalists across Canada. We have a pretty well-known journalist in Australia named Avi Yamini, who covers the news down there. And I travel around a bit. I was just yesterday at Columbia in New York reporting on, I was just there right before the police raid.
Wow.
We covered the news in other countries. I remember there were riots in Marseille, France last year. We went and covered them. We're off to cover a major event in Ireland next week. So we do fly around and cover some international stories too. But it's all citizen journalism. By that I mean sort of grassroots style, low budget, and crowdfunded. I guess that's the last part of our story. A lot of journalists are subsidized by the government. And I understand it because it's tough to make a living. But if you're subsidized by the government, it's pretty likely that you're going to be gentle with that government. You can't really bite the hand that feeds you. So by being completely independent, by not taking any government money, by living off crowdfunding instead, that really allows us to be beholden to nobody. So we don't have, we have virtually no advertising. We have no government money. So we're really impervious to people who want to gag us.
So Ezra, let's talk a bit about this. Let's unpack what you're talking about. Why do you think the business model of news has evolved, actually maybe even in a revolutionary fashion over the last 10 years? And why do you think the business model of the independent citizen journalist like Rebel News is the wave of the future?
Well, I mean, the advent of the smartphone, it's not even 15 years old. And I think that's changed everything. I mean, the internet was around before the smartphone, but the smartphone took everything on the go. I think most people get the news on their phone. They don't even get it at their laptop, let alone a newspaper delivered every morning. So it's hastened the transformation of the industry, and it's allowed everyone in the world to be a journalist. Of course, there still are legacy journalists. Sometimes I call them regime journalists. There are legacy journalists with their $100,000 cameras and running around with their official news vans or whatever. Sure, they still exist. But I put it to you that the majority of breaking news and the majority of investigative news in the world is done by amateurs with their cell phone. I mean, just because it's in our hands all the time. And, I'm old enough to know what life was like before cell phones. And most people did not have a camera. I mean, who would walk around with a camera? It was an unusual thing. And now every single human being has a camera on them. So you're all journalists. Every single human being has social media. Not everyone, but almost everyone. So for free, you are a reporter, a videographer, an editor, a producer. And a lot of people do that as sort of a little hobby or an interest. But there's so many people who've done a great job at it. So you've revolutionized the industry in so many ways. And yeah, if you get a lot of clicks, you can get ads. But the model that we have is that people really like what we do, and they chip in $10 or $100. The average gift to our company is $58. So that we need a lot of people chipping in $58 at a time to make 41 payroll, for a payroll of 41. So we've developed different beats over time. And for example, I mentioned that I'm going to be going to Ireland to cover a news story. We'll put on the screen, we need $2,500 to pay for an economy class, 2 economy class tickets, a hotel for 2 nights, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll say, we will spend this on our trip to Ireland. Here's why it's important. So people can say, oh, I really want to hear that story. I'll give them $10 or I'll give them $50. So it's a very specific way of doing business. And for 9 years, it seemed to work for us.
It's pretty incredible that based on a crowdfunding and subscription model, because you do have a subscription that you offer to people as well. I've seen that on Rebel. It's worked. I've chipped in money to Rebel over the years. I also buy your swag.
Thanks.
My favorite shirts, I wear them when I work out typically, are the Rebel Canada themed shirts. The big one with the Canadian flag, 1967. God keep our land. That's another one. I actually wore that at the gym today. I also have the Rebel with a Cause T-shirt. That's a fun one.
Wow.
God, Guns, and Freedom. I bought about a dozen of your shirts, so they're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun to wear, and I go to a pretty woke gym where I live because it's close and my kids get to go there and whatnot. But the people who run it are pretty woke. But I come in with my Rebel themed shirts every day, and it's just glorious because the people that work out there are regular folks like us, and a couple of them walk up to me and go, "I really like your shirt. That's a great shirt." I go, "Thank you." But the people that work there, some of them are just a bit snooty and their noses go up in the air when they see the shirt. So,
our most popular shirt is a split image of young Justin Trudeau and young Fidel Castro with their photos right together. And I think underneath it, going from memory, it says Justin Castro or something.
Castro, EAU. Yeah, I see that one. Yeah.
And the thing about wearing that shirt is don't wear that shirt if you want an introverted evening. Don't wear that shirt if you want a quiet night out. Because you put that shirt on and you go outside the house, everyone's going to look at it and have a reaction. And typically the reaction is at first they recognize Trudeau, and I have to say these days he's pretty unpopular. So people are, in that first second before they quite understand the message, they're sort of mad at you. But then they get the joke and they laugh. And I tell you, I have a bunch of shirts, as you can imagine too. It's my company. And I wear them and I know I'm going to be talking. Like if I go for a walk with a dog, I know everyone's going to say something or even just give me the thumbs up. It's really fun. And I don't know. I like it. I find Canadians, even if they disagree with you, they're still pretty friendly. And so I don't mind talking to people who, we're pretty flavorful. I mean, I think most media is vanilla and we're a little more like Tabasco. But still, Canadians are Canadian. I think people are pretty friendly, even if they disagree with you.
Yeah, they are. Canadians are great people. This is a wonderful country. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about Justin Trudeau is that he has deliberately tried to turn us against each other. His policies, his rhetoric is designed to divide. And he wants people at each other's throats. That's been his whole strategy to stay in power. But the beautiful thing about the last 2.5, 3 years in the post-lockdown era is that his act's starting to wear thin. And I give full credit to two groups for this. One is Rebel News and the other are the truckers. Because when the truckers started their magnificent odyssey to Ottawa, basically what they were saying is, hey, we want to be heard. And I went to Ottawa to support these folks, Ezra. And I knew some of the folks involved in the organizing, and I spoke to a couple of them. And I went there. And, I'm from the Middle East. I'm from Iran. I'm a Christian from Iran, okay? So they're saying, oh, my God, this is full of white supremacists. Well, I got to tell you, the vast majority of the people I saw at these protests were not vanilla mungy cake Canadians. They were Eastern Europeans. They were Sikhs. They were Middle Easterners like me. They were black folks from Jamaica and Nigeria. So maybe 25-30% were like white Canadians. So I'm like, dude, if this is a white supremacist place, they're really bad at it, eh? Because they're letting in all kinds of non-white people. That's the first thing. So we knew he was full of crap. And then I saw bouncy castles, little kids playing. This was the most fun protest I've ever been at. I felt safe the entire time. I didn't feel like I needed to have something with me to do that. So for me and for a lot of people who started to see that, due in large part to Rebels reporting, they could see that Trudeau was lying. It was obvious that he was lying. He refused to meet with his opponents. Contrast that with Stephen Harper, who had a bunch of folks come and protest his policies, come to Ottawa. He sat down and he met with the leaders of the protest like a man, like a leader, and he didn't agree with what they had to say, but he at least heard them out, made them feel like they were honorable citizens who had every right to come and say what they said. Justin didn't do that. And I think the image that will forever be emblazoned in my mind, and it was one of the images that your cameras carried, was that old lady in the walker who the police horse ran down. You remember that? I think that thing went viral. That thing went crazy. And 2 days after that, Trudeau pulled back the Emergencies Act. Now, I have friends who are poobahs in liberal politics. And one of them, I'm not going to mention his name, said to me, the reason that Justin pulled this back is because the Senate was about to vote it down overwhelmingly. It wasn't going to be close. So all these lefty liberal senators, Justin forgot that they're all civil libertarians, and they were horrified by that image, horrified to see a Canadian police officer running down with his horse an old woman with a walker. Yeah. And I want to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, the fact that you saw that image is one of the most important parts of the story. Obviously, what happened is the most important part. But you know the old saying, if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, did it make a sound? And you might remember when the convoy started, the mainstream media, or I sometimes call them the regime media, they didn't want to cover it. They said they were afraid. So they were up in their offices. They didn't even go down to meet these people. So you just described when you met them, what did I hear from you? You felt safe. You felt that people were from all different backgrounds, and it had sort of a festival feeling. I had the same reaction. I drove there. It felt like I was in a city after like a Stanley Cup victory or something. And so you got the vibe, which was fun and peaceful and patriotic and positive, not violent, not scary, not dangerous, not the January 6th, insurrection that Trudeau, he actually used that language. He was hoping for his moment where the other side would be go too far and he could have sort of like a Reichstag fire moment. Didn't happen. I don't know if you know, but that center block of Parliament, the one with the famous Peace Tower, the one that we all know, it's being closed for renovations. So no one went in. Everyone stayed in their trucks or on the street. It was super peaceful. Anyways, my point is, you saw what happened in real life, but a lot of journalists didn't. It fell to the citizen journalists to show it. And I think that the citizen journalists helped foil Trudeau's plan to shape the narrative of these are violent, racist people. They weren't violent. They weren't racist. And I think, let me just give you a personal anecdote from Rebel News. We had reporters just on the street, just live streaming, just showing like for hours at a time, just showing. And in that month of February 2022, we had 400 million views and impressions, 400 million. Obviously more than we've ever had in any month before or since. That's such a large number. And I would say maybe half of them weren't even Canadian. So, of course, we were telling the story to Canadians, but the rest of the world was excited. And where did they get their news? Not from the CBC, not from the Globe and Mail, but from our young journalists. We had, in Ottawa in particular, we had 2 journalists who worked 23 days straight because they didn't want to miss a moment. And we had So we were actually with the convoy as it drove. We were at other trucker protests across the country. But what does that go to? It goes to, in the past, you would have had to rely only on the, quote, official voices: CBC, CTV, Global News, Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, and National Post, and that's about it. And by the way, a lot of newspapers and radio stations are owned by the same company. Post Media owns most of the newspapers in Canada. Bell owns most of the radio stations. So my point is, really, you have a handful of decision makers that would tell the story, the narrative, and they're all part of a little club. But we broke that cartel with citizen journalism. Seriously, I'm talking, we had journalists in their teens. We had a journalist helping us who hadn't even graduated high school yet. And you might say, well, what's the level of professionalism for they know how to hold a camera, they know how to point a camera, and the reason that's important is because people can see for themselves. And most of our journalism was just showing what was happening and following the facts wherever they led. So it was a great time for us. We met a lot of nonconformists, which I think is a good thing for a journalist to be, a contrarian. You don't want to be a contrarian just for contrariness' sake. You don't want to be quarrelsome just for its own sake. But some people who are a little bit prickly and a little bit quirky, those people can become the best journalists because they're skeptical about everything. And every once in a while, that skepticism is going to pay off. And when you're dealing with politicians, it's best to be skeptical. You don't want someone too chummy. If you're a reporter and you're getting Christmas party invitations from every politician, and if they're delighted to see you and if they're chummy friends with you, you might be doing your journalism wrong. You don't want them to hate you, but you want them to be slightly nervous that you're going to, you want the freedom of movement to take a shot at them. And a lot of journalists, I've seen it with my own eyes, in that key moment, they say, no, I value my relationship. I value my influence or my lines of communication. I have access. They value the access more than the news. And so they've sort of been colonized and groomed by the politicians. They're being captured by them. And the one thing about being a citizen journalist outfit like we are, when you are paid by your viewers, not by the politicians, you pay attention to your viewers. If it was the opposite, if we were not crowdfunded, and if we were funded by the government like the CBC, we would obviously do what the government said. It's pretty obvious. Whoever pays you, the government, it would be like if Exxon or if Philip Morris gave subsidies to a newspaper. Of course, those newspapers would be gentle to Exxon or Philip Morris. Well, why do we think it would be different when the government gives money?
Listen, you call them regime media. Honestly, they're like state media. They're state propaganda. They are towing the line, the narrative that the Trudeau government wants them to tow. There is absolutely no pushback. And this has not been historically the case in Canada. Canada has had a robust free press, but because the business model has changed and they've accepted the crack cocaine-like money from the government, they're like crack addicts right now. They're addicted to this money. They're unable to practice real journalism, and they are unwilling to bite the hand that feeds them. There's no question about that. But coming back to what happened to Trudeau, as a result of the truckers having the courage to do what they did, people and Rebel News reporting it, because that's very important, right? People started to see that this man was a charlatan, that this man was a liar. Now, folks that were insiders in the game, like you and perhaps myself and others, knew that. But I think a lot of Canadians started to see that. And one thing that I can tell you, a lot of previous Liberal supporters were very turned off by the invocation of the Emergencies Act. They were not happy with the truckers. They didn't think the truckers were going about it in a very Canadian way. Right. But the Emergencies Act was seen as massive overkill. And my contacts and friends in Liberal world told me that if the Senate had officially rejected the invocation of the Emergencies Act, that Trudeau that would have triggered a non-confidence vote. And they believed that Trudeau was going to lose that non-confidence vote. He pulled back because he knew his government's very existence was at stake. So Rebel News and the truckers broke the backs of tyranny in February 2022. This is why I've been so excited to speak to you all this time, because you're one of the heroes of helping break the backs of the COVID tyranny of 2020 to 2022. Shortly after that, all the major provincial governments got rid of the restrictions, and the federal government was forced to do the same. So I want to just say to you, it's an honor to be speaking to you, because you played a massive role in that. And I know that you've paid a great personal and professional price for it, with Trudeau coming after you with this BS Online Harms Act. But you and these truckers can take pride in that you are Canada's civil rights leaders. You've helped defeat the tyrants. And yes, they're coming back at us and they're trying to take away more rights, but they've lost some serious battles. They've been bloodied. And I think it's very much because of what you did that Pierre Poilievre has been able to stand up, speak powerfully and truthfully about what the Liberals are doing wrong and what he'd do differently. And that's what gives me some comfort in knowing that I believe our next government's going to be a conservative government, and it'll be the most reform-like government Canada's ever had. So when people say reform was a failure, I'm going to say you need to take the long view. In my opinion, reform was a massive success. Reform took the liberal light version of the Progressive Conservative Party and destroyed it. And as a result of doing that, reform was able to help us come back with a phenomenal conservative party right now that I think is the best, most conservative government we've ever had.
Thanks for your friendly words. I mean, the truckers, it was sort of amazing when you think about it. No political party supported the truckers. I mean, the People's Party did, but I mean, no political party that was in office, not even the federal Conservatives. I mean, think about all the different institutions in our country, the media, politicians, all the opposition parties, the colleges of physicians and surgeons, like every universities, professors, every establishment institute was for the lockdowns and for vaccine mandates. These independent truckers, working class, individual guys and gals did it on their own. And even when they tried to crowdfund some money, that was taken away from them. They still persisted. And it's a miraculous story. And I mean, I think of 1984, the book by George Orwell.
Yes.
And he said, hope comes from the proles. That's his nickname for the working class. And it was the truckers that saved us. We were simply recording what the truckers said and did and showing the world that they were not the caricature that they were described as. Let me say one more thing about eyes opening. I mean, I met a lot of fascinating people during the lockdowns who I probably wouldn't have encountered had it not happened. Let me give you an example. Members of the Green Party. I mean, I'm a conservative guy. So the Green Party, they typically wouldn't have a lot to do with me or truckers. But all of a sudden, the leader of the Green Party of Canada supports mandatory jabs. But a lot of Green Party people I know are into health, natural medicine. They're skeptical of big pharma, especially untested vaccines. So for a lot of Green Party members, they were saying, what's going on? Since when did our party echo big pharma? Take the NDP. A lot of NDPers are union members. Yeah. Well, the NDP did not stand up for workers' rights. How are you imposing this requirement on us? It's not part of the collective agreement. You're not grieving it for us. A lot of NDPers felt like they were sold out. How about the Liberals? A lot of traditional Liberals had that phrase, my body, my choice, and they were thinking mainly about abortion. Okay, all of a sudden, it's not your body, your choice when it comes to a jab. So many people from different walks of life across the spectrum felt alienated, and they couldn't get their news from anywhere. The Globe and Mail, the National Post, almost all the newspapers. I mean, there was a little bit of difference amongst them, but they were all pretty much supportive of what was going on.
They were.
So I think the role that Rebel News played is that we showed people they weren't alone. I don't know if you've ever heard of something, Nikki, called the Ash conformity test, ASCH. It was an experiment in the 60s by a professor named Solomon Asch. And it was a very simple experiment. He had 2 cards. On one card, he had 3 vertical lines of different heights. And on the other card was 1 line. And he would hold up the 2 cards and he'd say, which of these 3 lines is the same length as this line? Like a child could do it. And he had people volunteer for this experiment. But here's the trick, Nikki. Here's what's so fascinating about the Asch conformity test. So let's say 6 people were in the room, and they all had to, one after another, say, line 2, line 2, line 2. Here's the trick. 5 out of the 6 of them were in on it. So the experimenter would hold up 3 lines and say which line is the same height, and they would all say the right one. And then the next one, they would all say the right one. But then on cue, all the 5 people who were in on the trick would say the wrong answer, Nikki. And so wrong answer, and you have to say it out loud, one after the other. Wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer. And then there was only one person in this whole experiment that was naive to it. So it looked like there were 6 people, but it was actually all set up to work on one guy. And what Professor Asch found is that, if I'm remembering the stats right, about 35% of the time, the naive person, the only one who didn't know what was going on, would go along with the group, even though he could clearly see that the line was not the same length. Like, this isn't, high math. This is just, can you see which line is the same? And Professor Asch afterwards said that there were 2 things going on. First of all, some people genuinely thought that they might be wrong, that maybe they weren't seeing it right or something. And I think that's an acceptable thing to say, well, maybe they see something I don't. But he found that a lot of people knew that they were right and the group was wrong, but they went along with the group anyways, just to fit in, just not to cause a fuss. And so they knew that what they were going along with was incorrect, but they did it anyways. Here's my point about the Asch conformity test. In a variation on this, Professor Asch added someone who gave the right answer. So they went wrong answer, right answer, wrong, and then the naive person. And conformity fell to 5%. What's my point? Having just one other person in the world speaking the truth gave the naive participants courage that they could stand up and not feel like the only one in the world. How does this apply to what we're talking about? Nikki, for 3 years, we were all told that everyone was fine with it, that everyone was fine with the lockdowns, everyone was fine with 6 feet of separation, which we don't even know where that came from. Everyone was fine with get a jab or lose your job, even if you already had natural immunity. For years, we were told, get on board, everyone's doing it. Look, the media agrees, the politicians agree, the opposition agrees. Anyone who disagreed, if they were a doctor, they were investigated by the College of Physicians. What Rebel News did, in our own amateur way, is we said to people, you're not crazy, you're not alone, don't be shy, be who you are, don't go along with everyone. We were that other person in the room that let conformity fall from 35% or whatever down to 5%. So that's what I learned from the Asch conformity test, is that a single person standing up against the crowd not only can be right, but can encourage so many other people to say, yeah, I thought I was the only one, but I'm not. I'll speak up too. That, to me, was the role that we played. Not that we were brilliant or wise or perfect, we were very citizen, very amateur, but we let people know they weren't alone. And I've heard 1,000 times from people that that's what they appreciated that we did.
That's beautiful. You know, there's a quote from Andrew Jackson, who was the 7th president of the United States, and it goes something like this: one man with courage is a majority.
Yep.
And to me, what you did and what the truckers did exemplifies this. My beautiful, beloved girlfriend, Teresa, who is a very sweet, feminine woman, said to me when the trucker protests were going on, she had never felt so much pride in being a Canadian. She had never felt so alive. She never likes going anywhere. I'm the one who makes all the plans for us to go away, go to courses, all that. So she's a homebody. But when the truckers came on, she said, "When are we going to Ottawa? Come on, step it up, bud. Let's go. I want to go support these guys. I want to see what they're doing." And it was a wonderful time. It was an incredible time. And I think it started to break the backs of tyranny in Canada. And I remember the moment I knew when the truckers had gotten somewhere was after a few days of them doing this. I remember Pierre Poilievre was being interviewed on the parliamentary steps. And it was the first time a major Canadian party, right? So not the PPC. They're great, but they're not a major Canadian party. They may become one, but they're not one right now.
Right.
He got up and he said, "These truckers are law-abiding, hardworking Canadians who all they want is they want their government to hear them out, and their government is not hearing them out, and they should. And they have a right to protest." And the CBC reporters and whoever the heck else was there trying to shove their cameras in his face and, have a gotcha moment with him. It was when I saw, a star is being born over here. He just kept repeating that same mantra 3-4 times. And he said that the government needs to listen to its citizens. They have a right to dissent. They have a right to say what they're going to say. And when he said that, I said, okay, if the Conservatives are starting to see that there is value politically for them to take the side of the truckers, that was the first time the Conservatives had, not towed that line, right? That was before Poilievre had become the leader of the party. I think at that time it was still Aaron O'Toole. And I thought to myself, this guy's going to be the next leader because Aaron O'Toole is an idiot. He's out. Everybody knew that. And then the day after that happened, the interim leader, Candice Bergen, got up on the floor of the House of Commons and made a vociferous speech attacking Trudeau and supporting the right of the truckers to protest as Canadian citizens. And I thought to myself at that point in time, Trudeau's done. He doesn't know it yet, but he's done. He's done because there was a crack in the unified line of all the major parties at that point in time.
If you look at opinion polls, and you can find them, there's websites that aggregate opinion polls over time.
Yes.
Trudeau's decline really set in around the time of the truckers and the Emergencies Act. And his popular decline has been a slow and steady, but it really was around that moment. And I think that's because the mask fell and he revealed himself to be different than what he had sold himself as. And what's interesting is I follow a lot of pollsters, but my favorite pollster to follow when it comes to Trudeau is a pollster named David Coletto, who works for a company called Abacus.
Yes,
or Abacus Research. And here's why
I follow their work quite closely.
I've had a chance to meet him a couple times. I used to be closer with him, but so I admire him. I think he's a smart guy. But I know that the company leans liberal. Their chairman is a member of the Liberal Party. So I know that if they criticize Trudeau or if they say something that's unflattering to him, I know that it's not just a flourish for partisan reasons. If anything, it's sort of grudging. So I trust Abacus because I know that it is not in their instinct to be tough on Trudeau. And one of the things that if I recall correctly, that Abacus research shows is that people who fall out of love with Trudeau, they fall out of love hard. You don't just dislike Trudeau, you either like him or you hate him. And my theory on this, and I don't think Abacus has researched this, is it's like when you fall in love with someone and your heart is broken, or you feel like you were cheated on or tricked. It's not a dislike. There's sort of a disgust that you were fooled in the first place, and you're sort of mad at yourself. And so let's look at Trudeau. He came across as a feminist. He came across as a friend of visible minorities. He came across as all these things, but as a civil liberties guy. But he revealed one after each other that he doesn't. On the race stuff, it was revealed that he dressed up in blackface so many times he can't remember. On Indigenous relations, he fired the first Aboriginal justice minister in Canadian history because she wouldn't bend the law for his friends. There's so many things he's done that I think young people, he's turned them off, partly, I think, because he's made things so expensive. No one under 30 can buy a house in Toronto, Vancouver, or any big city. No. And I think the people who were in love with him, maybe were in love with him for shallow reasons. He was young, he was cool, he has nice hair, he has a good high EQ, emotional intelligence. But so if you like a guy because he looks good and he's sort of suave, and then you realize he sort of tricked you, I think it's revulsion. And I think it's fascinating to me that Trudeau is doing so poorly amongst young people, because typically it's parties of the left that do well with young people. Pierre Poilievre is more attractive to young Canadians than Trudeau is. I never would have imagined that in my life.
Well, I'll tell you why that is, because I professionally, what I do is I'm a business advisor, business consultant. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I help them. I help them with thought leadership, with messaging. I help them with sales and growing their business. And I delve very deeply into the issue of why people buy, what makes people buy. And it applies to politicians as much as it does to products and services, obviously, right? So we are living in a time, Ezra, where the buyer, or in this case, the voter, has evolved. So they are harder to fool in the long term. You can fool them in the short term, but to keep fooling them is way, way more difficult. Young people in particular, the number one trait, quality, value that matters to them is authenticity, realness. Right. They will forgive you if they vociferously disagree with you, but if they see you as scrupulously honest, they will forgive that. They can completely hate everything you stand for, but they'll look at you and go, that man is a truth teller, even though I think he's crazy and wrong, but I respect him.
Yeah.
So this whole thing that you said about Trudeau and they feel fooled by him, I think you're bang on. They're angry that they've been fooled. I talk about this phenomenon in business. I call it the charlatan marketer. Trudeau is a classic charlatan marketer. He's a charlatan and he's a marketer. He has low morals and ethics and incredible sales and marketing skills. Incredible. But once those guys are found out, they're screwed. There's no coming back from that, because when people have decided your brand is that, and Pierre Poilievre, whatever you may say about him, he does not come across as dishonest. He comes across as a man who stands his ground for what he believes in. You know, he's a politician, 100%, but he's not a liar. And I think that why Trudeau has gone down so low among young people, I'm not surprised at all. In fact, I think he's not hit the floor with those folks. Those folks are going to abandon him at a level that no liberal has ever been abandoned. And in my opinion, in the next election, Pierre Poilievre's biggest cohort of support will be from people under the age of 35. He will win the greatest vote share, even more than people your age and my age. I'm 56, so I don't know how old you are. I think they're going to come out for him in droves for exactly the reasons you said. They hate the fact that they can't buy anything, and they feel like they were lied to. So,
yeah, I think you're right. It's amazing. Let me give you a comparison. In the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party amongst the youngest voters is at 1%, according to a YouGov poll. 1% of young Brits are going to vote Tory. And I think if you look at the British Prime Minister, his name is Rishi Sunak. So he's a visible minority. I think he's a Hindu, if I'm not mistaken. He's sort of young. He's sort of cool. But he comes across as someone who would say anything based on the polls. And he's a corporate guy. And so you would think, oh, well, he's very hip and progressive. No, because he's inauthentic. And I think it's amazing that Canadian conservatives have figured it out. But I think you're right. It's not so much that they figured it out. It's that Trudeau has bollocksed it up so bad, to use a British phrase. I think that Trudeau he was given such an opportunity. And you mentioned dividing earlier. He has divided. He didn't have to divide. He divided on backs. He divided on like he tries to wedge everything. Oh, you're a transphobe, you're a homophobe, you're a xenophobe. Like he demonizes his opponents. Maybe it works sometimes, but it doesn't seem to be working now. Thank goodness. I'm glad Canadians aren't being tricked by it.
Well, my understanding is some of his political advisors were people who worked on the Obama campaigns and are part of the Obama team. That's been their entire playbook, to slice and dice and divide. That's how Obama won his second election, and it's what they believe is the only way they can win. I think it's short-sighted myself. And when you talk about Rishi Sunak, I'm familiar with UK politics. I followed a bit. I didn't realize he was only polling at 1% among young people.
Just with the youngest cohort. Yeah.
I'd be interested to see how Nigel Farage is polling with that same cohort, because he is a conservative who has a very authentic brand, although he's anything but hip and cool.
Right. So
we should be able to see that. I think it's important. I think it's important for Rebel to do and I'd be happy to come on your show if you like to talk about this, to do a dissection of why certain politicians are doing well and why certain other ones are not, and to talk about this whole charlatan marketer phenomenon, because it's a phenomenon in business. People are turning away from business brands where they feel they've been lied to in a really, really big way as well. So, anyways, here's one of my final questions for you, Ezra. So you and Rebel have created a wonderful business and brought a whole new business model into the world. And you're a part of the changing landscape of the political and journalistic relationship. Given that it's almost certain that Justin Trudeau's Liberals are going to be defeated in the next election, if you were giving advice to Pierre Poilievre, who's likely to be our incoming prime minister, on how to deal with the media, with the legacy regime media as well as emerging media such as Rebel News, what would your advice to him be?
Well, I think that he's got to defund media. First of all, it's a corporate welfare. And if you look at the companies that own most of the media in Canada, they're billion-dollar companies. They don't need money so first of all, they don't need it. And second of all, it distorts the journalism, as I mentioned before. You can't be paid by someone who you're reporting about. It's just going to, even subconsciously, make you change your coverage. Second of all, in the case of the CBC, which is larger than all other private media combined in terms of news, there's more reporters for the CBC than all other media combined. So that has such a distortionate effect on things. I think he's got to follow through on his promise and sell it, privatize it, hand it over to the workers. I don't care. Just get it out of the hands of the party in power. That would be the number one change. The second thing I would say is don't be afraid of journalists. And I don't think he is. He often calls them out. One of my favorite, remember when he was eating the apple at that orchard?
Yeah, I love that.
And people said, oh, he wasn't being rude. He was just challenging things that journalists have gotten away for years. Like, some people say that blah, blah, blah. And he would say, which people say that? And Poilievre knew there wasn't some other guy who said it. Poilievre knew that was a journalistic device. It was the journalist who felt that way, but the journalist was pretending he was doing real reporting instead of just scratching his own itch. So I think Poilievre is savvy enough to call out the BS like that and to do it in a demonstration way so the viewer says, oh, yeah, I can see how the media aren't neutral. I can see how they're biased. Poilievre has a big job to educate news consumers, to make them more skeptical about the bias of reporters. And conservative politicians in Canada, at least, aren't good at that. So I think Poilievre actually is doing a great job on media management. He doesn't bend the knee for the legacy journalist. You don't see him sitting down for sort of vanity conversations with a Peter Mansbridge or Rosemary Barton, because he knows that he can get better treatment and more coverage talking to grassroots citizen journalists or just making videos of his own, frankly.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's very good advice. I would, suggest to him as well that he ought to sit down and do some long form podcasts, the way folks like RFK Jr. have done in the U.S. And I think he ought to sit down with Rebel News and do a long form interview with you guys and with some other organizations. And this whole question of educating people about media bias, that's something that he could spend like a whole hour on if he came and he sat down with Rebel News, and he could talk about why it's important for citizen journalists to come out and start questioning these things. I think if he does that, it'll make his job a lot easier when he actually is elected. And I think your kind of journalism is here to stay. I think the legacy regime media is going to die. I believe that Poilievre is going to follow through with his promise to defund the CBC. It's the most important promise he's made. If he goes back on that, he's politically dead. So I think that's going to happen on day one. And I think he's going to have to start defunding the other media outlets as well. And it'll be a wonderful thing. So I just want you to prognosticate on Canadian politics for me for a moment. What do you think of some of the smaller parties in Canada, in particular the People's Party of Canada? I interviewed Max Bernier, and I find him to be an erudite, fascinating, intelligent man. Do you think that party has a future in Canada or not?
I've known Maxime Bernier for probably 20 years, even before he was an MP. I've always liked him. I like his liberty streak. He's very much, he cares about freedom. He talks about it. He was very strong during the lockdown. And that his tactical advantage was that one of the advantages he had was that Erin O'Toole was not very freedom oriented, not very strong on these things. And so Maxime Bernier could eat away at conservative support from the right. And people who were disappointed in O'Toole and the Conservative parties could cluster around Bernier. Unfortunately, that was not enough to get Bernier into Parliament. And I think he's run in 4 elections and by-elections, and he just can't punch through. And at the same time, Pierre Poilievre has been stronger on those issues. Poilievre's talking for the first time about immigration, very carefully, but he's starting to talk about the raw numbers. He's talking about, he's certainly talking about housing. He's talking about, you mentioned that Poilievre was more warm towards the truckers, not that those are current issues. I think that Poilievre is stronger on the issues that PPC members care about. So you have a stronger Poilievre, plus people feel that Poilievre has a chance to win. So I think that, listen, I have a lot of time for Maxime Bernier, and I've known him personally before politics, but I don't think he's going to punch through. And I just think that there's only 2 people who could possibly be prime minister in a year, Poilievre or Trudeau. And I think Poilievre is so much better than the last opportunity, better than O'Toole or even Scheer. I just think freedom-oriented people should cast their vote for him. For all of his flaws. I don't know. I mean, maybe and I don't say this casually, because I've been a critic of the Conservatives, both federally and provincially, for years. But I think Poilievre is saying and doing the right things. I love how tough he is on the media. And I think he's going to roll back a lot of I would love the fact that he's against the carbon tax. Erin O'Toole supported it. So anyway, I suppose I'm giving sort of a standard conservative litany here, but I actually think that Poilievre is the most conservative leader, obviously, since Harper.
Yeah, easily. I agree with you there. Do you think in the long run, the People's Party of Canada is going to be able to break through and win some seats? I don't know if they're going to do it this time. I agree with you. But do you think they've got a future in Canada?
Never say never. And I don't want people to think I'm speaking ill of the PPC, because I think they did important things. But I just don't see them punching through anywhere. And that's the nature of our system. There are other countries where if you get 5% of the vote, then you get a proportionate representation in a parliament, like Italy, Israel, Australia, I think Germany is that way. Like there's a lot of countries where if you get 10% of the vote, you get 10% of the seats. In Canada, the People's Party can come third or even second in a lot of places, and they won't get a single seat. And that's just the nature of our system. So I do not see Maxime Bernier or his party breaking through in the next election. And if it goes as I expect it will, I doubt they'll break through in the election after that. That's not saying I like that outcome. I'm just saying that's the nature of our system. And I don't know. I don't think there's too much more to say on it. I mean, I look at the province of Quebec, where Eric Duhem of the revitalized Conservative Party there led a great campaign, and he really got a lot more support than before. But he didn't come in first anywhere. So that's just the Canadian system, and it's too bad for thoughtful guys who come in second and third in a lot of places, but not first anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. So as we wrap this up, Ezra, what is the best way for people to support Rebel? Like, what do you want them to do? What's your call to action for people?
Thanks. Well, if people haven't checked us out yet, I'd say start with that. Go to rebelnews.com, and we're very active on Twitter. We're easy to find on Twitter. We've got 500,000 followers there. We're on YouTube. We're on Rumble. So it's really easy to find our stuff. It's just called Rebel News. And, we have a lot of we call them campaigns. So whether we're talking about the carbon tax or I mentioned that I'm going to go cover some stories in Europe, there's different ways for people to get involved. They can sign a petition. We drop off petitions with politicians. Every once in a while, they listen. People can chip in if they feel really passionate about something. They can chip in with crowdfunding. But I think the easiest thing for people to do is just watch our stuff. And if they like it, to share it. We have a marketing budget of zero. So how do you get 2 billion views if you have a marketing budget of zero? Well, word of mouth and people organically sharing it because they like it. And in my mind, that's the best kind of a referral, someone sharing it with a friend. And luckily we've been able to get that. But Nikki, it's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you and to talk with you. And I love your energy and your enthusiasm and your optimism. And you mentioned your age, and I tell you, I would have guessed 10 years younger, not just because you look young, but your energy level. So you must be doing something right. So thanks for having me, and all the best to all of your viewers. And thank you so much for your hospitality.
Ezra, 100%. I've got one last thing to ask of you before you go. So I want to also tell people, go to the Rebel News store. They have great T-shirts and great swag. Go buy yourself some T-shirts. Like I'm telling you, you're going to love sporting them, and they're fun and they're conversation starters. So make sure you do that. And if you like their content, chip in for some of their campaigns, or subscribe to Rebel News. I want to tell you this. I'm not getting a commission from Ezra for saying this, okay? I promise you I'm not. But I really believe in what they're doing, and you should do that. So Ezra, last question. We like to ask our guest expert for what we call their top 3 expert action steps. These are your bullet point best pieces of life or business advice that you want my listener to take on to make their life, their path better. So what say you? What are your top 3?
Wow. Well, I have not prepared my answers, so I'll have to give them off the top of my head. I think the first one goes back to what we talked about before, about not being afraid to be a nonconformist. Because just because everyone says something's right doesn't mean it is. So don't be afraid to be a gentle dissenter. You don't have to be a wild man about it, but be an individual. I guess the second and related one, and this is one of our mottos here, is follow the facts wherever they lead. What do I mean by that? We all have ideas and preconceived notions and theories of life, but what happens if we encounter something that breaks our theory? Well, there's a temptation to throw away the fact and to keep the theory, if you know what I mean. But
yes.
You've got to alter your worldview because of facts. I guess you could call that learning or growing. So it's okay. I mean, you don't want to be changing your worldview as often as you change your shirt. But I think it's okay over time to evolve in your views by learning and encountering facts and people you never met before. So I guess, I mean, maybe those are too generic as proverbs, but they've stood us well as journalists. And I guess the third one is I don't know. I think trust the people. There's a wisdom in the common man that sometimes there's things so crazy only a PhD could believe them. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would close by saying that just because someone doesn't have a formal education doesn't necessarily mean they're dumb. And just because someone does have a formal education doesn't necessarily mean they're smart. We've seen a lot of kooky people at Columbia University over the last week, and that's an elite Ivy League university that costs almost $100,000 a year Canadian in tuition. So don't put too much stock in credentials. I mean, listen, obviously you want to respect a doctor, for example, because they actually have learned some valuable skills. But just because someone is not formally educated doesn't mean they're not wise. In fact, there's a lot of wisdom in the world amongst the people. That's why we have a jury, by the way. Judges are very well trained in law school, senior lawyers, but we also believe that 12 ordinary people have a wisdom to it that sometimes a judge doesn't. So I guess those are three little rules of thumb.
Those are incredible expert action steps. Ezra, it's been a privilege to have you here on the show. God bless you. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure was all mine. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.